All right, I know it's been a minute, and for that I apologize. I've been a little busy, and I've had a lot of this footage that I had to go through. Unfortunately, a lot of it wasn't very clear. I'm trying to make this as informative as possible, right? Because I really do think that anybody with an average amount of talent and an average amount of intelligence and an average amount of mobility in their fingers and an average collection of tools can pull an engine out of a car, rebuild it, and put it back in. Because I'm just an average guy with all the average tools and average intelligence. So, I don't really think it's that difficult, and I think you should be able to do it, and I want to be able to show you that. And unfortunately, a lot of the video that I had like the camera was right up against the car, and all you saw was like the grill of the car for 15 minutes while I grunted and turned, and it just wasn't very helpful. So anyway, I picked out what I could. Basically, all we're going to do here, we've got the bracket for the glow plug controller. We're going to put that on. It's a little fiddly, but it's not that big of a deal. We're also going to go ahead and get the wires in place, the fuel pipes in place, and then we're going to go ahead and do the air conditioning compressor, put that back on, and the power steering pump as well. The next video, which I really, really would like to promise you is going to be right behind this one, but I'm not going to make that promise, but I'll promise that I'll try. How's that? That's going to cover putting the turbo on. And I think that's actually kind of more helpful generally because there's a lot of maintenance-y kind of things that you may have to do. Maintenance. Replacing the swirl motor is basically maintenance on this thing, right? Anyway, it's more common that you'd have to pull the turbo off, do something, and then put the turbo back on. So this will cover putting the turbo on. I know I did a video a while back, years ago, about getting the turbo off and doing the swirl motor and getting everything back together. But this, I think, should be a little better view of the turbo installation process. And as they say, removal is reverse of installation, I guess. So anyway, here we go. Enjoy this. I promise I'll try to be back really soon with the turbo install, which would be part 16 of this series. But for now, enjoy part 15.
This bracket is the one that's going to hold the glow plug controller in place, and a few other things kind of attached to it as well. It's a little tricky. You have one bolt that kind of goes into the head, and then you have the bolts that go into the, basically you're going to bolt through the glow plug controller itself. So it's one of those situations where you got to put one bolt in first, because if you don't, you can't get to the other bolt, and so on and so forth. So just kind of it's a little fiddly. The glow plug controller has a little white piece of plastic, little insulator on it. Basically, that's going to go up. So basically, the glow plug controller is really going to be mounted upside down. You can kind of see there. And you have a bolt that goes through it in the back, and then that front bolt actually has a little nut on the other side to tighten the whole thing down. See right there, holding that nut on the bottom and tightening the bolt from the top. Now we've got some wiring harnesses that need to come around and kind of be out of the way. These are all kind of stiff and kind of hard to work. But basically we just have to be able to get that vacuum line installed, and then also this little wiring harness snaps into the port right there in the front. Just kind of stays on that bracket nice out of the way, doesn't get chopped up by the serpentine belt. The vacuum reservoir is a little tricky to get in. Again, it's because of this wiring harness kind of pushing and being where it is. But basically, pull the wiring harness up out of the way as much as you can. You get the O-ring seated, and then the bolts that go into it will kind of cinch it up and get it into its place correctly. Once that's done, you've got the big honking power cable for the glow plug connector, or glow plug controller that's going to come around, just kind of route through and snap it in, and that'll take care of it. Next up, we've got to get the wiring harness installed. I realize it looks like we're taking a little step backwards here, and we kind of are. The first time I installed that bracket for the glow plug controller it didn't really. The video didn't turn out. I had to take it off and put it back on a couple of times, and I went ahead and recorded that one of those other times and used that previously. So that's why it looks a little different now, but that's okay. So getting the wiring harness installed, you can do this off the car, and I would actually in the future probably recommend doing it that way because that way you can put the turbo on and all that on the stand, off the car, drop the whole thing in, and it's a little easier. You can kind of get to it. The problem I had is I didn't know where the CDI control unit, the N3/9, was located on the vehicle. Couldn't find it. WIS's instructions are useless in that regard. It's up underneath the fender. So if you pull the fender liner out on the right side of the car, you can see it up in there. It's held on with a couple 10 mil nuts. You can pull that out, pop the connectors off, and then back the whole connector out of the car and put the wiring harness on and then reconnect it once you put the engine in. I didn't do that. Whatever. All the wires are pretty easy to figure out. It's got sort of a natural bend to it, so you kind of lay it in place and it'll pretty much show you where it wants to go. A couple connectors that I couldn't figure out right out of the gate. The glow plug connector, actually, I wasn't sure what that was. Somebody had to tell me, and I managed to get it plugged in. It just didn't look right. And then one of the air boxes on the left side of the engine has a temperature sensor on it, and that gets connected as well. So you kind of wind up with a connector. I didn't know what it was because the airbox wasn't there. But once the airbox went in, it was very obvious. So the fuel lines, the wiring harness, all of that just gets arranged, gets plugged in, and then we'll be ready to move to the next step. Takes a little bit of time, but it's not too bad. In order to make the whole process a little bit easier, I left the power steering and air conditioning lines all hooked up and just pulled those parts sort of off of the car, off of the engine, and left them off to the side in the car. So in order now to get everything hooked back up, the AC compressor needs to be bolted back onto the engine, as does the power steering pump. When I put everything in there, of course, there's a little bit in the way, had to move it around. So the first thing that had to be done is that AC compressor had to be slid into place. So that's pretty simple. Slides into place, goes onto the side of the engine like that, and there's 4 bolts that come through the side, as you'll be able to see here. Right here, coming into the side, those bolts, a little hard to get to, but you just fiddle around with them and they will eventually go in. So, there's standard E-Torx, long bolts, same thing Mercedes uses everywhere. So just go ahead and put all 4 of those in, and then we'll meet up back here for the power steering pump. All right, great job. Now that that's in, now we've got to wiggle the power steering pump into place. Of course, it's got its lines attached to it and all that. But once you have that wiggled in place, again, we just have the bolts that hold it right onto the side of the engine, and we just put those on, like so. Once those bolts are in, oh yeah, we'll have to do the ones in the back as well. And once those bolts are all in, then it's a matter of hooking up the reservoir and getting that back in. There's a hose, of course, that connects the reservoir to the pump itself. That clip is a little difficult to get to. In fact, this is the clip that made me go out and buy the actual tool right here for doing those spring hose clamps. I could not figure out a way to do this without it. Pays for itself just in this one job. But go ahead and get that clip set. Get it opened up. The reservoir will go onto that hose, and then the reservoir can be bolted on. No big deal. There's just a couple of bolts then that hold this reservoir in place. not that big of a deal to do. Just slide those in, bolt it down, and now you've got your AC and your power steering all back on, and all the wiring's in place along with the fuel lines. Well, now with all of that connected, when we come back, we're going to go ahead and do the turbocharger installation. That's kind of a video in and of itself. I promise, well, I'm going to try to promise it won't take as long as this one did. But yeah, we'll see you next time with the turbo install.